Hello and welcome. I've been hinting that things haven't exactly been easy lately, and I think a lot of people maybe can relate to that. We're living through interesting times. Life's been heavy, and as it moves forward, I find myself questioning who I am, what I'm doing, and what I even believe in. And lately I've been asking myself, am I too optimistic, too idealistic? What if I've been wrong about everything? Today, I'm joined by one of my closest friends in the drug policy reform space, Jean Lacy. And over the years, Jean has been a source of inspiration for me, insight, and on more than one occasion, my unofficial therapist. I still owe her my insurance information so she can charge me for her services. Jokes aside, Jean has truly been a North Star for me. She's helped shape the way I think about policy, advocacy, and how to keep moving forward without losing your grounding. And I'm so grateful for her voice, her vision, and the chance to share this space with her today. She recently wrote a powerful piece entitled Choosing Both, Rest and Resistance, Healing and Hustle, Purpose and Peace, 10 Years in Advocacy on her Substack. Truth is, writing scares me. And in doing so, she's once again stepped into the role of my unofficial mental health care professional. I highly recommend giving it a read, especially if you're involved in advocacy work of any kind. It's full of lessons and reflections I think we could all use. I got a lot out of it, and I think you will too. You'll find the link to that article in the show notes. And without further ado, please welcome my friend Jean Lacy for her first episode on
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo. The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memorandum.
The Cole Memo.
The Cole Memo is what allows this whole thing to go on.
I mean, you have to respect the memo.
Hey, this is Tommy Chung, and you're listening and watching The Cole Memo.
All right, Jean, let's do this. How are you doing today, my friend?
Oh, living the dream as we do here in the Midwest. How are you?
I'm doing good. And I'm just displaying on my screen right now your Substack, Truth is, Writing Scares Me. Like I said, I'll have it linked in the show notes for my listeners. But you want to take a moment, Jean, to introduce yourself. I tried to give you a warm intro, but I'm sure you have more to tell the listeners about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. And I also didn't really dawn on me until you said it in the intro that this is my first time on the Cole Memo. I've been on the Illinois podcast before, but this is my first time here on the Cole Memo. Your intro always brings me a lot of joy, particularly the part of Rep Ford saying, "You've got to respect the memo." So good. So hi, everybody who's listening. I am Jean Lacy. My pronouns are she, her. I am the founder of the Illinois Psychedelic Society. And for the last 10 years, I have been engaged in grassroots activism in Illinois drug policy. I'm an advocate, an organizer, a writer, most recently getting my feet wet with writing on Substack. I'm a mother and a person with lived experience. I talk a lot about my journey with plant medicine that began out of desperation, but ultimately gave me restoration. And now my work is about helping others navigate healing in systems that weren't built for us to thrive in. So excited to be here today, talking to you and sharing more about what I've learned in that time.
Yeah. And I wanted to, I don't think this is going to be a dark episode by any means, but I wanted to start off on a definite light note. Just a reflection of what we've been through together. And it's a simple, fun story. We were in Denver. We were enjoying cannabis. And you were telling me that you had just had this experience where some people that weren't from Denver, I mean, we aren't either, but, these people approached you and they said, "Hey, you're just smoking weed out here. Is that okay? Or are you just being a rebel?" And you're like, "Oh no, it's totally legal here." And as you were telling me that story, because I was just like, wow, that's such a cool experience. You got to introduce people to legal cannabis. And as we were having that discussion, another group of people came up and they're like, hey, we notice everybody's just like smoking weed out here. Like, is that just like a thing here? Like, is it okay? And we're like, oh yeah, look up a dispensary. You can go and purchase some yourself. It's just a really cool experience that we shared together.
It's the best. Those are the glimmers, the moments that give you like joy and rejuvenation, because you're just like, I call them like what a time to be alive moments. Because
Yeah.
you're just like, wow, we've come so far. Like I remember when, like the first time I wore a cannabis t-shirt out in public, and like how nervous I was about like what other people might think. And this has been many years ago now. And now I have like a wardrobe full of them that I like give away to people sometimes, and they think it's awesome. But I love those moments where, I'm reminded that I've been kind of immersed in this whole other world, this almost futuristic feeling type world, where, and I talk about that a little bit in this, in the Substack, where living like liberation is possible now, and that's kind of what it feels like. And it's like, oh yeah, we do have these freedoms that we haven't always had. But I also talk about the, the conflict between that feeling and being reminded that there are people who are still incarcerated for their engagement with this plant. And so it's always this kind of like wow moment followed with that tinge of reality.
Yeah. And, you kind of lay it out in this piece, choosing both. But I'm just curious, like, what made you decide to write this specific piece? And again, I recognize that you sort of lay it out in there, but I feel like these were probably thoughts that were rolling around in your head for a while and you had to put it out there. But I'm just curious, what ultimately made you decide to sit down and write this piece?
Yeah, my whole reason for writing a Substack is really purely personal. It's not about like gaining followers or even necessarily having people read it. I've got a handful of people who let me infiltrate their email inbox with my writings, but it's really about catharsis for me and being a part of my healing journey. And I have, been in almost a dark night of the soul phase for the last couple of years. I went through, losing a parent, and, the grueling work that I've been doing with IPS, and other things happening in my personal life that just kind of turned my world upside down. And so, this has been part of the process of kind of coming back out of my shell a little bit, and just starting to pull on the strings of the things that have been happening in my inner world in that time. So this particular Substack, I had been starting it the week of a week or two leading up to 420, which is our holiday. And I always that time of year and just feeling really reflective. It just gives me like a nostalgia. It gives me this, and I think that's kind of the part of the magic of 420, right? It can take us back to all kinds of places where we've encountered our relationship with cannabis. And now, being immersed in the psychedelic space, we have 419 Bicycle Day, which is the day that Albert Hoffman had his infamous bicycle ride after, the first psychedelic dose of LSD. And so we've watched, just like with 420, this 419 just kind of coming more into people's awareness, and people having a lot of events around it. So, I use the word commercialization not as a derogatory term, but just an acknowledgement of what we observe and what I've observed over time. So I've written really long Facebook posts and journal entries about this topic before. So this was really just a part of my reflection. And it also dawned on me this year that, my first job in the cannabis space, I started in 2015, and that's been 10 years ago. And I was like, oh, wow, this is like my 10th 420 that I've been like celebrating in a context of stepping into this world and immersing myself in it. So yeah, again, pulling at those strings and digging this out of my consciousness and hoping it resonates.
Yeah, well, it definitely resonated with me. Particularly, there's a point where you talk about how martyrdom is a movement strategy, you know. Um, and I'm just wondering, like, what specifically on that point, what made you realize that you needed to redefine what I guess sustainable activism looked like for yourself? Like, was there?
Oh, it's really been this has been a huge part of my process. And for me personally, I tell people all the time, like, work is my real drug of choice. And it's the real way that I like to distract myself from, feelings and dealing with things in my own life. So I'm always trying to weigh that balance in my own life. And in advocacy, I think we're especially vulnerable to that because of the way that the systems are designed to extract from us in this world, and particularly in this space. Um, so I've been having this kind of similar conversation with other leaders of advocacy organizations and nonprofits that do a lot of really incredible work that I often feel like pales in comparison to what I do, or the other way around. I think I said that in reverse. Or what I do pales in comparison to what they do. But what the common thread is, we all have that similar struggle, the like clawing for funding and just trying to go up against these like really strong systems that are their own industrial complexes in themselves that we're trying to carve out tiny pieces of to do work that is meaningful to us and the people in our communities. So there's this struggle that happens a lot of times with people who are really driven by the mission of the work and end up draining themselves to complete depletion, and really don't ever replenish themselves and just continue in the work, or worse, they burn out completely and they are just turned off by the idea of continuing to do any kind of advocacy or nonprofit work, which is a shame. So I've definitely experienced this ebb and flow in the last 10 years. And I think that I've been one of the fortunate ones, who, in spite of my list of struggles and challenges in life, I also have some privileges that afford me the ability to continue to do this work and plug away at it, even in the down times when it's really hard and I'm burnt out and I need some space. So I have been able to ride along the roller coaster. But this is again a reflection of what the reality of that looks like, and hearing from all the other nonprofits who are facing this current political climate that we find ourselves in, and are scared that like this is going to be the final nail in the coffin of their movements and their organizations. And again, like these are people who are doing really important work that are helping really vulnerable populations in our community. So yeah, I think that there's a lot to be learned from there. I also had a conversation with our mutual friend Peter Contos from the Canna Equity Coalition. Absolutely adore Peter and Doug and the work that they do over there. And we've had this same conversation just about how hard it is to keep sustaining and keep going and keep applying for grants and building new programs and doing the advocacy and this, that. And he sent me a write-up. It's called "The Revolution Will Not Be Funded." I'll send it a link to you so you can include it in the show notes. But it talks about this as well, and about particularly the nonprofit as an industrial complex, and how it's designed to burn us out, so that progress is very slow and hard to obtain. So yeah, again, just reflecting on the teachings of that, and thinking about how it's applied to my own journey in this space. And then the other thing I think is, like, we catch a lot of flack. We carry a lot of people's um, a lot of people's opinions and perspectives, and that's challenging on a good day, and on a hard day, it's absolutely soul crushing, and we deal with a lot of criticism, and a lot of um, people who think that we should do things this way, or do that, or try this, and it's a lot to carry.
Yeah. And something you've mentioned to me even in like private conversation is like the idea that some of that criticism, definitely comes from outsiders, but sometimes it's the hardest when it comes from who you might consider to be insiders, like people that are part of the movement.
That's right. Yep.
Yeah, it can be really tough. Any other thoughts just like on that specific idea? Like,
I think that that's been one of the hardest things for me, because you have to really try to decipher what is, a projections of other people's inner worlds, and what is valid criticism. And people will say things that that they don't have the same perspective as you. So it's hard for them to even have a valid opinion. I think it's really important to have discernment when carrying all of those different perspectives and that feedback. And I tread carefully there, because part of our role as advocates is to be speaking up for people who aren't in the spaces that we're in, and be that voice for them. So part of the job is holding space for people's opinions and people's perspectives. But I have learned the hard way that that work requires a lot of inner work on my part, and a lot of taking care of my nervous system, and making sure that I'm in a regulated state to where I can adequately process that, and not have it contribute to the burnout, and be that weight on my shoulders.
yeah, that's powerful. It's if you can't tell, I'm just processing a lot right now. This work is tough, and it almost feels even tough to say that, because it's like I can hear somebody saying, well, you chose to do this. Yes, but it's like that doesn't mean we haven't put our all into it, and it doesn't mean that we don't carry that weight through it. Like, and oftentimes the reason we choose to do this is because it's like that old cliche saying, we want to be the change we want to see in the world.
Well, and I often tell people this work kind of chose me. And if it weren't for my life experience, then I don't know that I would have been on this path. And I think that we see, like, that's true for a lot of other people who become advocates, or who work in politics in general. I can think of I won't get too far into national politics, but I can think of a couple, like, really big, large examples right now. Like, you see David Hoggs, the vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, saying that he wants to back younger candidates, more progressive candidates. And his whole story is that he was one of the survivors from the Parkland shooting. And I think that he shares that. If he had not had that lived experience, he would not have become a rabid advocate for policy reform that, can solve some of the issues that that led to the experience that he had. So I think that that's really important, actually.
Yeah.
And it's again, it's part of what drives our passion to continue to do this work, and it can lead down that road of burnout a lot quicker because we pour so much of our hearts and souls into it. And yes, we do choose to keep getting up and keep fighting the fight, but it comes from that place of knowing how it felt to not have access to these tools and resources, and to not have the policy in our state reflect our needs.
That's a really good point. You know, I guess maybe I feel that I definitely have a different trajectory than you. And so maybe I feel that because I feel like I really got directly involved in drug policy once, the state of Illinois passed the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act. But like you said, and you've told your story in the past on, my former podcast. And like you say, that definitely wasn't, it wasn't a choice. Of course, like you say, going forward, remaining in the policy reform space, that's been a choice. But the reason you found yourself within this space, was, a reflection of experience you had gone through, the mechanisms that you had to face, or the system, for lack of better words. And I hadn't really thought about it that way, because I almost even described my experience on getting into this space as a purely personal choice. But like you said, it really was because you recognize there are still limitations to the system. There are still issues with the system. And so in those ways, somebody might be able to call it a choice, but it's yeah, how else do you change anything other than just getting directly involved?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for me, it was a critical part of my healing journey, because I faced a lot of, I'll call them social consequences, for coming out about my cannabis and plant medicine use. And I still do sometimes. We something that we have in common is living in the not Chicago part of Illinois, where, people's mind views are a little bit more conservative than what we maybe see on the electoral map in our state. And so it's been hard to be open about it. And part of convincing myself that I wasn't doing anything wrong was to be involved and be more involved in the advocacy work and in the, legal aspect of the space in itself. And I will be honest that I started using cannabis and in a time where it wasn't legal here to do so. And I desperately wanted it to be, because I wanted to remove those stigmas from myself and be able to have that in my tool belt to say, to the people who were judging me, well, it's okay because it's legal now. You know what I mean? So part of my process was to getting involved and taking action in the space to even break down the stigma in my own mind, that this was something that was okay for me to do, because there was never anything wrong with my cannabis use. It was literally saving my life. And I still felt, and experienced tremendous shame and guilt and judgment from others who didn't understand, and who now 10 years later are, way more open-minded about it and have a way different understanding. And again, those are the moments where it's like, wow, what a time to be alive. I can talk to some of the most conservative people in my life about this very openly. And I even have to catch myself sometimes, because I feel very comfortable, talking with lawmakers or whomever about my drug use at this point. But there was a long time where it was just so hard. And I think of the people who, again, don't have as much privilege as me, and it's just not quite as safe. And, they have even more, they don't have any supportive people in their lives. And so it's even harder for them to come out and speak for them, or speak for themselves. So again, those are the things that keep me motivated.
Yeah. One of the things that this is meant to be a joke, but it's all jokes are based in reality, right? There's truth to every joke. And one of the things I was telling Justine the other day is that, like you said, I almost have to catch myself sometimes because I've gotten so comfortable in this world. And an example of that, I just realized like there's a relation to this statement. You know how like some people say like, oh, like you might be talking to them in the morning and they're racking their brain and they're like, oh, sorry, I haven't had my coffee yet. Sometimes what I will say, and I'm like worried, like I was just thinking about it the other night. I'm like, have I ever said like in a situation maybe where it's not, I don't want to say appropriate, but just like basically the way I say what like, oh, I haven't had my coffee yet is like, oh, sorry, I'm high. You know what I mean? Like, and I always wonder if like I've ever like, because like sometimes I'll say it and I won't be high. You know what I mean?
Right.
But that's like what comes to my mind. That's like the way I say I haven't had my coffee. And so
I had a very wise old stoner tell me once the trick is to make it so they can never tell whether you're high or not. So it's part of the trick, right? Like, well,
Really?
You'll never know because am I or am I not?
Yeah, no, exactly. And that's just kind of where that, for me, where that saying comes from. And like I said, I just realized it kind of relates to, oh, I've not had my coffee yet. But I always like wonder if sometimes if I were to accidentally drop it, because it's almost like it's like off the hip saying, like if I start racking my brain, it's like, sorry, I'm high, even though I might not be. But if I say that in front of the wrong person, they might be like, oh, what the hell, you're high right now, like so. Anyways.
We'll let them think it because there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah. So you talked about how systems extract labor from people with lived experiences. What ways have you found to like sort of stay grounded in your values when those institutions or even people try to co-opt or dilute the movement, because that comes up all the time, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's a good question. Honestly, this is a learning process, and for me, it's been all about boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And making sure not even just around my own labor, but what I ask of volunteers. IPS is a completely volunteer-run organization, so we have people who do a lot of different things for us, and being mindful in that sense and being mindful in what I allow others to extract from me. But it's been a huge learning process, and then I will also say like being really creative about ways that I raise money and trying to we have leaned on events for a really long time, like putting on different like psychedelic themed events, and I've gotten a lot of pushback saying that it makes us look too psychedelic, whatever that means, which really what they mean is that there's these certain spaces where you want to put on the image that you're this is all very high level professional clinical stuff, so that lawmakers or whoever's at the other side of the table will take you more seriously. So the argument is that by putting on more community focused events, I'm taking away some of that legitimacy from my organization, even down to like using psychedelic in the name of the organization, in spite of being registered and approved with the IRS that we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. People still have even stigma around hearing the word, getting to my point, the people from within the psychedelic community have a mindset that even by using the word, I'm delegitimizing myself and my organization and therefore the movement and what we stand for. So I think for me, it's been, about my boundaries around myself and the people that volunteer for me, around, also around my organization, and kind of pushing back on that idea a little bit that like it's okay to say the word psychedelic, it's not gonna hurt us. And I remember when we felt like this about the word cannabis. And I have that perspective of having gone through that like heavily stigmatized time where we had to push our own set of new language around this plant and how we engaged with it until it became more commonplace. So I feel like the same is true about psilocybin, psychedelic therapy. We're introducing new ways to talk about this, and we do have to kind of push the envelope a little bit, and with respect to people who shared those opinions with me, and who I even respect their opinions. They have their view of the space and their engagement in it. So yeah, I think it's just interesting to think about how we create new ways of operating within these systems, and learning for ourselves and our communities what that balance is between creating new systems and operating within what we have.
Yeah. And it is an interesting dynamic to deal with, because you recognize that people that, like the example you started off with, where it's like they have good intentions by trying to like almost reel it in, for lack of better words, like, but they don't understand that like you're kind of losing where you came from sometimes with that. And this is perhaps maybe a crude example we can both laugh at, but I've been corrected on, like, sometimes I'll say like, I'm smoking dope, I'm smoking pot, and people are like, hey, you're ingesting cannabis. And it's like, you're right, but like let's loosen up a little bit. Like it's
hard.
Mhm.
It's hard because I have and I talk about this a little bit in that Substack post, where I grew up in an environment where drugs were extremely stigmatized. I had a parent who struggled with addiction, and it was a very prevalent part of our lives. And so I still, like, those tense feelings come up a lot of times when I hear people using some of that more like casual language around drugs. Like there's words that come to mind that I won't even say because they like bring up such a visceral reaction for me. So it's I think that part of the challenge as like the leader of an organization is like acknowledging that, and being able to discern how we use language when and where, and this is like the title of my whole piece was like choosing both, because we have to ride that fence pretty much in all ways constantly. And this is another place where we have to ride the fence and say like, yes, there is this like, yes, relax. It's okay to use the word psychedelic. It's okay to, like reference casually how we consume. And we are introducing a new way of talking about this and being mindful of how we're doing that, and consistent across the space, which I think is a challenge of the psychedelic space right now. I think is really important.
Yeah. Wow, you brought up a old feeling when you were talking about like the sort of the visceral reactions that you're kind of you were raised in, because I also was not raised in I mean, still, like, my parents are not like a fan of what I do, or like when I've told them like I've pretty much altogether quit consuming cannabis, and I say pretty much because I still do it from time to time, but like, I've been doing it for more than 10 years, and over these last few months I have really cut it back. And when I tell them that, they're like, good. Like the type that's like, you should quit, so it's like they're not on necessarily, they're not against me as much as they were anymore, but they're also not like, advocates either. But I guess what I kind of went on a tangent with that. What I really identified with what you said is there are some times where either I look at myself and listen to what I'm saying or hearing other people saying, and I have that old, like, in the closet Cole visceral reaction to it. It's like, you're saying that out loud in front of people right now? Like, it's just kind of funny how even though our views have changed, we still can see things through that lens. Do you get what I'm saying?
Mhm.
That
Yeah,
conservative
totally.
Illinois lens.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just weird. We've been through interesting times, to just say the least. With I
I
think
think it's
it's
so interesting that you have not used cannabis in several months. I went through this a couple of years ago where it was probably 15 months or so that I didn't consume anything but like CBD oil. Um, and so very trace amounts of THC. And I experienced the same thing where it was, oh, congratulations. Like people would congratulate me, which I thought was kind of hilarious. Um, but the truth is that time I honestly, even looking back, the only reason I like went back to cannabis was because I had a surgery and I needed to, because it was like super effective pain management for me in that time. Um, and now it's off and on. I use it when I need it and I don't when I don't. But I taking that long space away gave me more reverence for the plant than I had ever had. I think it had become almost so habitual because it was such a part of my everyday life that taking that space from it was like, oh, wow, no, this is a powerful plant medicine. And I can now kind of zoom out and see how it changed my life on a day to day and on a broad scale. And I feel like since I've used it so much more intentionally.
Yeah. Yeah, and I feel like I've started to notice that too. I'm not too far into my journey with this change, and who knows if it will remain consistent. It's like a love-hate that I have with cannabis, where I think what I'm going through is a result of this love that I have for cannabis. But right now, it's like, let me just put it this way. A lot of times when I consume cannabis, it's almost, and this is going to sound hippy dippy, so bear with me here. I know that I don't have to say that to you, but it like communicates with me in a way where the best examples I can give is when I first started using cannabis. I remember I would go through my day and then I would end my day with cannabis, and I remember having these like really good, healthy reflections where it's like, Cole, why'd you handle that social interaction that way? Like, why couldn't you just have been like, it's all right, man, we'll work through that. And instead you did this or you did that. And those were like really healthy reflections, because otherwise, like I said, it brought these thoughts to the surface where it's like, I feel like if I hadn't had that reflection, I may not have returned with such a positive attitude the next day and said I was sorry, or, whatever it may have been. Like I say, I'm kind of using vague examples, but it's been a universal consistent for me that the way that cannabis has worked with me is it's like putting on a new set of glasses, and it's like, oh, I can see differently now. And I think that's why I've always been fascinated with the plant. It's like when you go through life and you might be having a bad day, it's really hard to like flip a switch and change the way you look at anything. But with cannabis now, especially with like vape pens and stuff, which aren't my preferred mode of consumption, but just for the analogy, like you can literally flip a switch and put a new set of glasses on, like I say. So,
And you can apply that same, and this is like some of the most beautiful lessons that I've learned when engaging with plant medicine is you can apply a lot of that to all plant medicine.
yeah.
And even down to like our food and the way that we eat. Like how does this change my perspective and the way that I interact with myself, my spouse, my children, my community, my land, my, everything, like the whole world. And I think that I talk about this a little bit again in the Substack, but plant medicine gave me a knowing of spirituality that I only had ideas of before I really started to engage with it. And that's exactly what I view that ability to shift perspective is that, kind of tapping into a collective consciousness and taking the lessons from, all of the repeat experiences that we have. Yeah. You're muted.
I'm muted. Thank you. Just realized that as I started talking. I've got more questions for you, I think, about this article, but I thought I might, because I've teased you enough, Jean, and I've teased my audience enough. I thought I might like share a little bit of like kind of what's been going on with me. And I kind of led off with it by talking about my, let's call it a change in relationship with cannabis, but it wasn't like, I think it's a snowball that kind of goes hand in hand. And like I say, I don't know that, I can't tell you for certain that like next week I won't go back to just chiefing it up like I was. I can't.
I will
promise.
not judge you in this economy. No judgment. I get it.
Yeah. What's funny though is I have had a few. Well, you know this about me. I'll bring literal prohibitionists on my show, and when I've mentioned that to them that I've kind of cut it back, it's that same reaction. Like, good for you. Like you're
congratulations.
I'm glad to hear you're making a healthy decision. Where it's like they're kind of being you can tell they're coming from a good place, but they're also kind of like slapping me in the face because it's like I'm not saying that I don't like cannabis anymore. Like I'm still an advocate for it. You're like making me feel bad.
But tell me your story.
Yeah, but no, it's okay. It's okay. That was a funny thought I wanted to get out there just because I've got an episode with a prohibitionist coming out, and at the end of the show I tell her like, yeah, it's been like at the time it had been like 2 weeks since I stopped consuming. She's like, good for you. Next time we should talk about Maranon. In other words, like Alcoholics Anonymous for cannabis users.
That was a thing.
Yeah, I think she started it. I don't know. Like I could be wrong, but anyways, I had this experience where, and it's been a growing thing. Like the plant has been telling me this for a while now. It's kind of like what I started off with. Like, am I being too idealistic? Am I being too optimistic? Am I wrong? And I recently went to the Capitol to advocate for a policy that would remove law enforcement's ability to search your car based on the smell of cannabis. I went to a Senate committee hearing and testified, and that was a really interesting experience because I went through it, I testified, and I actually didn't feel nervous at all until I turned around and saw a room full of law enforcement officers, uniformed, staring at me. I was like, oh my God, I just did that. Then there was a House committee hearing, and on the way there, I thought, well, I'm going to go to the dispensary that's like a couple blocks away from the Capitol, and I'm just going to buy a product that smells. Like I literally walked in and I was like, hey, I know that this is a weird request, but can you get me like your most pungent product? And they're like, oh, they were talking through things. They're like, this one, like what smell are you looking for? I'm like, no, I literally I'm not asking for a product that smells any sort of way except for like literally like in the packaging unopened. And they're like, that is a weird request. Can I ask you why you're doing that? And I just gave him background, and then we went through, they brought out different products and they're like, I think I can smell this one outside of the packaging. It was just kind of funny. Anyways, I got to the Capitol. I brought this package in. Apparently I met my goal. I stunk up the entire hearing room with the smell of cannabis. And I sat next to some journalists, and I was just discussing with them, and I said, are you guys going to be covering the cannabis odor hearing later? And they were like, yeah. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm actually here for that. And they're like, oh, is that you? That smells like cannabis. And I was like, well, it's not me. It's this bag that I have right here. Like, I've got this unopened bag, and I brought it in, and they looked at me and they're like, you're going to get kicked out for doing that. And I was just like, I don't think I will. I said, what outlet did you work for again? And they told me, and I was like, well, your outlet literally covered that the law enforcement did this last time. So I'm just doing what they did last time. Anyways, it was that sort of side eye that I got, that it's like, are you really coming here and doing that and bringing this to the Capitol? And just like made me feel bad. But then also the real thing that got me was there was this camera guy. And I asked him, because I noticed at the beginning of the Senate committee hearing that they like specifically read off who would be capturing like video of the proceedings. And they were like, Capital News Illinois is capturing video of or whatever. I don't remember who it was. Doesn't really matter. They just announced different outlets, and they're like, any objections? Any objections? No? Okay, let's proceed. And so I just asked him, because I saw somebody from a similar outlet in that Senate committee hearing. We're now in a House committee hearing, and I'm like, hey, what do I have to do to put my permission in to like capture these proceedings? I would like to capture them for myself. And he was like, oh, well, in the House, you don't have to do that. That's just in the Senate. That's just in the Senate committee hearings. I was like, oh, cool. Thanks, man. I'll get set up and stuff. And he was like, what outlet are you working with? And I was like, I'm not. I guess you could call me an independent. And he was like, oh, well, that's not going to work. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, the First Amendment just doesn't apply here? Like, freedom of press? Like, who certifies who's press, right? I thought it was all of our rights. And he was like, no. It's like in the Senate rules, it specifically says you must be like, and I looked it up. He was absolutely right. It like defined that you must be an approved source or whatever. And I was like, okay, cool. Thank you for that information. And he ended up leaving, and he came back, and I had my camera set up, and I like was trying to be nice, and some other fellow advocates saw this go down. I was like, oh, I thought you were gone. I'll move my stuff out of the spot you're in so that you can set up again. And he's like, no, it's all good. He's like, this is supposed to be for where the press is. It's kind of like a condescending comment, in my opinion, where I was like, as I just told you, I am, exercising my First Amendment right here. I didn't say that to him. I just politely moved my things out of the way. And one of the things he said under his breath was, oh, well, he actually asked me, he said, because he heard me talking and I was saying that I was testifying. He's like, oh, so you're capturing and testifying? And he like rolled his eyes at me. And he said under his breath, he said, either you must be new here or this is your first time here. And it didn't really like kind of pissed me off, to be honest, but I just kept my comments to myself. Everybody else saw it happen. The committee hearing ended up being canceled. But as I walked out, one of the thoughts that came to me was, I was like, no, he's absolutely right. I am new here. And it just like, I had been wondering if I was wrong. I had been wondering if I'd been too idealistic and maybe approaching things the wrong way for a while. And I'm not even necessarily saying that I was approaching that the wrong way, but it was just emblematic that I am new. I have not had the lived experience that maybe he has had, or the other journalists in the room have had, or anybody else in the room had had. I am new here, and I don't know what I'm doing. And it just was this like really heavy feeling where I was like, should I just give up? Because I don't know, like, and I'm having trouble putting this into words, but because it's been a thought that I've been mulling over for a while, and there's a lot of different ways I could go with this. But I started to wonder, like, he was right. I'm out of my element. I'm new here, and maybe I should just not do this anymore. And I don't know. It was a kind of a sad thought, because it's like I want to do this, and I feel like I'm fighting for the right things. But just like as simple as that first interaction with that journalist I was telling you, where she was like, "Is that you?" She kind of had this like disgusted look on her face. And I was just like, man, like, I don't mean to have that effect on people, you know? And so it's just to kind of wrap up the whole thought, because I know I kind of went on a tangent, but I wanted to mention those other details because it's like I had been having these thoughts for a while, but then to go through that experience and be kind of like looked at, like disgusted, and also like somebody under their breath being like, "You must be new here." At the time, I took offense to it. And then, like I said, when I was walking away from it, and cannabis, I think, brought this to light. I was like, damn, they're right. What the hell am I doing here? You know? And like I said, ever since then, I've just been wondering, like, you know me, Gene, like how I approach the topic of cannabis. Like that interview that is in that intro with LaShawn Ford, I say things like, sorry, to back up to give full context, because I feel like I may have just skipped over a few details. In the introduction of this show, LaShawn Ford is saying, you got to respect the memo. And in that actual interview that I did with him, actually in Denver, one of the things I said was, in my view, cannabis is not legal until you can buy, sell, use, grow as much as you want, need, or please. And that's where those thoughts where I'm like, am I being too idealistic? Am I being too optimistic? Am I radical? Like, it's not that I don't agree with those thoughts, like, and it's not that I'm necessarily stepping away from those thoughts, but I'm just wondering, like, is it too much too fast? Like, am I just jumping from 0 to 100? Because for many people, it's not black and white, it's gray. That's what I'm realizing, I guess. And I'm looking at it like it's black and white, like, and I'm almost being purist. Like, if you know, again, it's not that I'm necessarily changing my views. I'm just wondering, like, if I'm approaching it correctly, if I should be more, because in the past I've kind of shrugged off incrementalism. I'm like, no, it's all or nothing, you know? And I just am not, I'm thinking that it's not that way. Like, I feel like I'm being slapped with reality. And that's kind of the thought. I'm curious what you think after I've kind of unloaded all of that.
I'm having a lot of thoughts right now. And like the most prominent one is being, I will fight that guy over being mean to you. For legal reasons, that's a joke. But yeah. I have like a mama bear like feeling, because there's no reason to be rude to you like that, even if you are, you know, outside of some arbitrary boundaries or breaking some rules. There's a way to like say that to somebody without being condescending. And so that's one. The other thing is, you better not stop doing what you're doing, because there's not enough people here in Illinois doing what you're doing. You know, I pay a lot of attention to politics, both here locally and nationally, and even a little bit globally. And independent media is more important now than it has literally ever been in the 249 years that we have been a country. And I mean that with my whole heart, for all of the reasons that anybody, you know, might think. Like, we have a lot of misinformation that is spread through the mycelial web that is the internet that connects us all. And it is really important that we have, you know, people out there speaking the truth to us, and people that we can trust are going to give us accurate information. And what that is starting to look like in our new landscape is a lot of podcasters and people with Substacks and people with Patreons and you know, independent people who are sharing their perspective, yes, but also facts with us. And there's nothing wrong with sharing your opinion, by the way, along with the facts. That's, why a lot of people watch the mainstream media, because you get a story followed by a whole panel of people sharing their opinions about it. And this is just a different form of that, in a way that has, a lot more interaction. So I would love to see more people like you focusing on not just drug policy, not just cannabis policy, but Illinois policy in general, and bringing some of these things to light. I would love this like new media movement that we're seeing on a national scale, come to the Midwest. That being said, I had somebody tell me just recently, like, oh man, if the world ever really ended, I would want to live where you live, because everything happens 10 years later. There is some truth to that, being in the rural Midwest. I like the quaint small town life, but yes, I would love to see a lot more of you pop up. So don't quit. I think it's really important. And as far as being too idealistic, again, I think this is where we go back to choosing both. We have to hold on to our ideals and hold on to our vision of what is possible, and also have a pragmatic strategy that's going to incorporate as many tactics as possible to get to that ultimate vision. And sometimes that does look like, what we might call incrementalism, or passing policies that are, plugging away at little bits of the problem without solving the bigger issue. But that doesn't mean that we give up on the ideal post-prohibition world that we are all been envisioning. And in fact, getting back to my Substack post, like, living like that is possible. And not only is it possible, beyond our lifetimes, but what ways can we incorporate that idealistic life into our practices right now, and the way that we talk about things. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I can also say that this is the thing where I think that I try to ride the fence on, and I try to, like I said, hold on to my ideal vision for a post-prohibition world, while also taking just whatever step I can take in that direction, whatever it looks like. And, IPS recently introduced the Hope pilot program. And this was immediately a couple people's questions. It's a smaller bill. It doesn't do as much. There's no decrim measured. So there was, some immediate pushback of like, do you even want to do this? Because it doesn't include the whole thing that we want to see happen on the other side of this. Well, yeah, I still want to do it because people are dying. Don't know if you noticed, but we are indeed in a mental health crisis that is not getting better by the day, and we need new solutions. And this, if I stand behind the saying that these plant medicines saved my life, I have to believe that they're a solution to save someone else's life too. And I have to advocate for that just as hard as I advocate for, my lifestyle to not be criminalized, because there's nothing wrong with the way that I live or what I do. And holding both of those truths and embracing some of that nuance, and being willing to stay in that gray area space and get comfortable there, I think is a critical key that unlocks a tone of sustainability in this work.
Yeah. And like, it's kind of what we've built this whole conversation on, where it's like, I wonder if I hit that point where, it was unsustainable. Like, I was kind of putting too much on myself. And I want to read a few excerpts that I found notable from, highly relatable, I should say, from your article, in line with that thought. For a long time, you said, that without context, that one's probably hard. I'll say, I wore exhaustion like a badge of honor. I thought solidarity meant showing up to everything and saying yes to everyone, caring at all. But I have learned martyrdom isn't the movement. It's how the system wins. And another one that really in line with this thought is to fight for a better world and to rest like I already live in it. Like, yeah, that's just words that I needed to hear and needed to read at this juncture, I would say, because I think you're right. You know, we can do both, and being pragmatic is okay. It's, you know, you do have to meet people where they are, and some people just aren't where we are, especially where we live. You know,
It feels like we live in the future sometimes. It really does. Like I say that jokingly, but it's, you know, I do feel like I live in a different reality with the way that I understand not just my own substance use, but substance use at large. And I feel a responsibility to help my fellow humans see things more clearly, whether or not that is the way that I see them. I want to share as much of my perspective as I can so that people can learn whatever they can from it to take that next step. And part of meeting them where they're at is acceptance of where they're at and where I'm at. And this is part of where, you know, it comes in, like living like liberation is possible now. Well, there are so many ways that I have been liberated from the stigma and the shame and the, you know, outdated laws that were holding back my relationship with plant medicine being, you know, more productive, I can say. But yeah, they're not there yet. They're just not there yet. So yeah, it's a lot of living by example.
yeah, yeah. It's I don't know, and I think it's a healthy thought to wonder if we're wrong. You know, like I feel like I've maybe gotten too far into it, where like I have started to consider like hanging it up. You know, like am I like just wrong about everything? Do I need to hang it up? I think, like you say, there's a healthy balance there.
I think about it all the time. Like, do I want to keep doing this? Like, just to be vulnerable and transparent. Like, I think all the time. Like, you know, have I reached the end? Am I ready to give up? And when I think about like what I would say to someone like you in a situation where you're asking that question, it's I agree with you 100%. It's healthy to have that question. Keep asking yourself that question and more. We need to be asking better questions of ourselves about sustainability and the systems that we're, you know, fighting up against. And if we give up, we need to, you know, if we decide to move on, I should say, with our time and energy, we should be ready to pass the torch and understand and give honor and respect to the work that we have done and understand that it has meaning. And that, you know, it's even if passing the torch doesn't look like somebody continuing on your podcast, if you gave it up, it would look like passing on that wisdom and knowledge and that perspective, even in the people in your community. So yeah, keep asking yourself that question and figure out, you know, I think it comes up most often when whatever we're doing isn't sustainable. So inquire, reflect, and create more sustainability in whatever ways that you can and whatever that looks like in your life.
Yeah. And I'm hoping that by having this conversation, that we're able to sort of pass on some of the, I hesitate to call anything that I've learned wisdom. I feel like I'm gathering a lot of wisdom from you, and I'm not just trying to be nice. I'm serious. But I hope that people can benefit from this knowledge that you're imparting, and hopefully, I'm not trying to like downplay myself. Hopefully, they can learn from my experience too. You know, and know that you can hit a wall And you can have these thoughts, like it's not like, I'm not trying to extend this too much, but there have been times where I'm laying in bed, like after I testified in the Senate committee, where I'm like, if I just would have stayed home today, that would have been a much easier day. And now I'm sitting here wondering about the people that I saw and the people that saw me, in law enforcement. It's like they could literally ruin my life. And I wonder, like it's like, man, I'm putting myself out there, and I I just don't want to be in a situation where I'm like sitting in a jail cell. I'm like, well, was it worth it? you know, was it
Or
worth it to push people?
well, but again, like I think that's the stigma coming up because nothing that you did was illegal.
True.
It was, socially stigmatized, but it wasn't illegal. If it was, you would not have gotten past the security at check-in because that's
True.
how it works. So yeah, I mean, I think like give yourself a break because what you did was it was a gentle form of protest to the absurdity of the situation, to be frank. And I think that matters, and I think it matters for for those of us who do have white skin, who do have like it's safer for you to do that protest than it is for a lot of other people and who are there. A lot of their community is currently still incarcerated for having had weed in their pocket. So like, yeah, don't be hard on yourself, and in fact give yourself a little bit of credit for being brave enough to stand up there. Thank you for doing that, because we need more people like you being willing to stand up and call the systems out on their bullshit, because what happened in that other hearing was bullshit. And so for you to prove that point, I felt like was totally valid, even if people didn't understand your point or they thought it was going a step too far. I'm glad that your life didn't get ruined. I'm glad there were no state police coming and showing up at your door. But I totally get why that is what comes up in those moments where you're feeling like, oh no, should I have done that, or did I just take it too far?
Yeah. Because it's like
yeah.
you're off the radar, and now you're on.
Mhm.
Now you're on the radar.
I remember feeling that way even like the first time I was on your podcast, and like I had done like a few podcasts like right around that same time, and I just like remember just feeling so anxious and terrified that like, oh my gosh, now like my story is actually out there in a big way. And like the first time that I like testified in a formal hearing, like you had texted me afterwards and was like, wow, you looked so confident. And like meanwhile, I'm sitting there and my heart rate's like in the 140s because I'm like so anxious, and I'm like physically sweating through my undershirt, hoping it doesn't come through my blazer. and yeah, again, like feeling that vulnerability and feeling like, oh gosh, like and sharing so much of my personal story. Like, what are my people in my family gonna think of me sharing my personal story? What are my kids gonna think? If they see this one day, which my kids do not care. But like that, what are people in my community gonna think when they see snippets on the news? Like we'll go to a school function and my kid will say like, oh yeah, so and so said they saw you on the news, and my heart starts pounding because you never know if they're gonna be somebody who's like, yeah, go Jean, or they're like, oh no, and they're thinking all those stigmatized thoughts about me. So I say all that just to say it's normal. It's totally normal. And we have to do it afraid. We've got to keep showing up and doing it afraid because the work requires that. And it's part of our journey too, of learning how to step out on that ledge of our comfort zone and, see what it might be like to throw something over it.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I have a lot to process. I'll probably have to watch this conversation back to fully process it. And even then we might have to continue the conversation off air, but you've given me a lot to think about, with regard to this. And like you said, sometimes then that has been a thought that's come up. Like, am I being too hard on myself? And another thought that you brought up, which is like, I have to remind myself why I'm fighting the fight, which is that like you said, there are people that are less privileged than me that can't show up to the Capitol, like even if they wanted to. And like, even in that experience that I told you that where the hearing ultimately got canceled, it's like things like that where it kind of goes back to your other point where it almost feels like the system is meant to make it so hard to participate. Like,
That's
I mean,
exactly
it's
right.
so hard to get there in the first place. And I happen to live, you and I both happen to live to where it's not like I mean, it's not a short trip, but it's also not like a crazy trip. We've got friends in Chicago. We've got friends, I'm sure, in Southern Illinois, where like they have to make a whole day out of it and probably like get a hotel room, things like that, or just accept the fact that they're going to be home past midnight. Luckily, we're privileged in many ways in which, not only can we show up, because, it may not even be that they can't make it because of their location. Like people have jobs. Like, how are you supposed to participate in the process? And then when you do take the time off, like I have done, and you go there and you make a whole day out of it, and then the hearing just gets canceled, it's like, wow, I just came here for no reason. Unfortunately,
Unless
that's
it's
okay
your
for me.
full-time job,
True. Yep.
it's really hard to keep up with that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's like, so I think that you're highlighting on why it's so important to support our advocacy organizations and the people who are speaking up for the causes that we believe in, not just if it's around drug policy, cannabis, or psychedelics, or what have you, but whatever your issue is, whatever is impacting you in your life. We need to be supporting these grassroots organizations because they are the ones who are committing the time and the energy to consistently being showing up in the space where the everyday person is pretty much shut out of the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to briefly extend your point, like what I love about the policies that we talk about, drug policy, is that in a way, please let me know if you disagree, but in some ways it's fun. Like it's fun, especially compared to like other policies you could get involved with, like healthcare policy. I know it affects us all intimately, but like, good Lord, what a yawn sometimes. You know what I mean? Like in terms of how deep it can get into like how healthcare coding works. And I'm honestly just making things up at this point because I don't understand healthcare policy. But my point is to bring it back around. My point and my hope is that when people get involved with cannabis policy or psychedelic policy, the joke I say, and I say it a little tongue in cheek, is, at least with regard to cannabis, I say cannabis is a gateway drug, and it has been for me, a gateway drug to politics. And the reason I say that is because it's like, I have learned, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you like, I know how the system works, because the people know much better than me. Like you say, they literally have jobs out of it, lobbyists, policymakers, you name it. But through this experience, I've learned like how a bill becomes a law. You know what I mean? And I think that's why I love these policies, because I hope that not only can people benefit from our wisdom that we've had in this conversation, but I hope that people benefit from learning about the process with these sort of easier to digest topics, so that they realize like, hey, you do have the power to change these other policies too. You get what I'm saying with that? I know that's
That's
kind of a
exactly
side.
right. It doesn't take a massive coalition to be able to change some public policy that affects an issue that impacts your life. And that's I it's not normal behavior to sit there and listen to hearings and all day and read all of the politics that you and I do. So I certainly do not have the expectation that anybody will take up our obsession. However, more people getting involved in the political process, even a tiny bit, even if it's donating to an organization that's working on a cause that you believe in and leaving them on a $5 a month subscription, like that shit helps. Get involved in whatever little way that you can, because our democratic process matters it's worth engaging in. It's worth continuing to participate in whatever way that it looks like for you. So I hope that people can take that from these conversations too, is that, yeah, it is rewarding. It is, you know, a drug in itself sometimes when you get to actually change things on an issue that you're passionate about. So yeah, you know, again, if you're not the kind of person that wants to really get in as deep as Cole and I are, at the very least, pick a cause and support somebody who's doing the work.
Yes, well said. Well said. Well, I don't really have a clean way to end this session other than giving you my insurance information so that you can charge me adequately.
I am not a licensed therapist or a mental health professional, so I will not be taking your insurance information. But yeah, I think
joke,
that's
though, right?
Yes, of course. I think that's a great way to end it, though, is like right on that note of like, people get involved. And those people who are involved, ask yourself, is this sustainable? And make sustainability part of your work and a part of your movement.
Yeah, well said. Well, Jean, I look forward always to speaking with you, but today was no exception. I really do appreciate your time and your wisdom, and I have probably said this to you before, but I just want you to know it while we're speaking to each other right now on the record. I look up to you, and I really value everything you've taught me. So I'm getting a little emotional, so I'm just going to stop there and let people know that I'll have that link to your Substack in the show notes. I definitely recommend checking out all of your writing. I recommend to my listeners to check out all of your writing, but especially if you're in the advocacy space, agnostic of the policy, check out the article, which I'll have linked individually as well in the show notes for this episode. Choosing Both: Rest and Resistance, Healing and Hustle, Purpose and Peace. It's a great piece, and it came out on 420. So what better way to celebrate the passing holiday than by reading this wisdom that you dropped? So again, thank you, Jean.
Cole. Thank you for plugging my silly little Substack. Looking forward to connecting with more people who are interested in the same things we are. So definitely come over to the Substack. I love it there.
Hell yeah. Well, folks, I hope you found as much value in this conversation as I did. We'll see you on the next episode.